Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're reconstructing one of the absolute most volatile moments of the 20th century. We're not just looking at what happened, we're figuring out exactly why the modern Middle East looks the way it does today. I want you to step back into a world completely shattered by the First World War. Century-old empires are literally collapsing into ash, and new nations are being ruthlessly carved out of the rubble. So let's dive into a singular moment in time that completely altered the course of civilizations. We usually study treaties that ended wars or built new nations, but today, we're examining a geopolitical document that acted as a literal death warrant for a 600-year-old empire. We're talking about a ghost treaty. It was never fully ratified, but the sheer brutality of it sent absolute shockwaves through history. And as you'll see, it's a document that actually still shapes the psychological and political realities of the entire region to this very day. Act 1, the execution order. The year is 1920. The victorious allies of World War I are absolutely determined to avenge the fall of Constantinople and, satisfy their imperial ambitions in the East. The Eastern Question, that age-old European debate over what to do with a declining Ottoman Empire, is about to get answered with absolute finality. I want you to really put yourself in this room in France. It's August 10th, 1920. We're inside an exhibition room at the famous Sevres porcelain factory. Right there, surrounded by delicate, fine china, delegates of the Ottoman Sultan, guys like Hadi Pasha and Riza Tevfik, are about to sign a punitive peace instrument that's honestly far more brutal than what Germany faced at Versailles. The atmosphere is just incredibly heavy, because this isn't a negotiation, right? It's a sentencing. The sheer scale of this dismemberment was completely unprecedented. The Ottoman Empire wasn't just losing a war, it was literally being erased from the map. Britain and France seized the Arab provinces, which, by the way, completely set the stage for the modern Middle East as we know it. Greece and Italy, they carved up the Anatolian coastlines. They even made provisions for an independent Armenian state and an autonomous Kurdistan. And the Turks, they were left with just this tiny, landlocked sliver of central Anatolia, completely cut off from the economic power of the Mediterranean. But it gets worse. The victorious powers didn't just take the land. They systematically stripped away Turkish military capabilities and fiscal independence to guarantee permanent, humiliating subservience. Get this. The army was capped at barely 50,000 men. That's nothing for an empire. The Navy was reduced to a handful of minor patrol boats, and they were outright forbidden from even having an air force. But the real kicker? The economic lifeblood of the empire, its finances, and the incredibly strategic Bosporus Straits were placed entirely under foreign control. Total subjugation. This brings us to Act 2, the Civil War of the Soul. So how do you defeat an empire that actually begins to fight itself? Because what happens next isn't just some rebellion against foreign occupiers, it's a profound internal fracture. See, the Sultan's government in Istanbul accepted the humiliation just to survive. They essentially believed that a weak existence is better than destruction. They genuinely thought cooperating with the British and French was the only way to save the caliphate. But then you have the Turkish national movement operating out of Ankara. Led by a brilliant military strategist named Mustafa Kemal Pasha, they saw this as absolute treason. No way were they going to accept this. They categorically refused to recognize Sevres. This wasn't just politics, it was a matter of life, death, and identity. You had two completely incompatible realities for the Turkish people colliding in real time. And so this became a vicious civil war of the soul. It actually culminated later on in the banishment of exactly 150 high-ranking Ottoman figures who were deemed traitors to the new republic. It was this violent tearing away from the imperial past. The nationalists looked at the Sultan's government and didn't see leaders. They saw collaborators who had completely sold out their homeland. The new nationalists had to systematically purge the old imperial elite. The list of exiles is fascinating. It included the very men who held the pen at Sevres, the commanders of the Sultan's own army of the Caliphate who fought against the nationalists, and even local police chiefs and rogue bandit leaders like Turkish Etem, who ended up switching sides. It was like a brutal societal surgery. You had friends, commanders, and colleagues turning on one another just to cut out the old regime. The internal fracture was absolute, and it ended with this incredibly dramatic, almost cinematic moment, the total abolition of the Sultanate itself. Picture this. On November 17, 1922, the final Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed VI, slips out the back door of his palace and boards a British warship, the HMS Malaya. Just like that, 6 centuries of imperial rule evaporate into the sea mist. The Sultan would actually die in exile in Italy 4 years later. The nationalists had won the Civil War. Act 3. Defying inevitability. So how exactly did the Turkish national movement achieve the seemingly impossible? I mean, they defeated an alliance that had just won a world war. Well, history is never inevitable. The Turkish War of Independence wasn't just a simple anti-colonial uprising. It was a desperate, multi-front war where Mustafa Kemal's forces had to rely on sheer geographical depth, brilliant military strategy, and, honestly, raw desperation. They were fighting in every single direction, totally outgunned and outmanned. They were fighting their own countrymen loyal to the Sultan. They were pushing the highly equipped French military south into Syria. They were driving Armenian forces back in the east. And, most brutally, they were locked in a horrific, scorched earth struggle to force the Greek army out of western Anatolia. The speed of this reversal was just breathtaking. In just over 2 years, the Turks went from total, devastating partition to forcing the British Empire and its allies back to the negotiating table. By securing their eastern and southern fronts first, Kemal's forces could focus all their energy on driving the Greeks from Smyrna in the Great Offensive. And when Turkish troops finally advanced on the British-held neutral zone during the Chanac crisis, the British public, who were completely exhausted by World War I, flat out refused to fight another war. Britain blinked. Which brings us to Act 4, the rebirth and the scar. This military miracle on the ground led to a massive diplomatic anomaly. It became the only World War I treaty successfully renegotiated by a defeated power. The Treaty of Lausanne completely erased the legal reality of Sèvres. Signed in 1923, Lausanne recognized full Turkish sovereignty. Those humiliating financial controls, the military caps, the foreign zones of influence, they were all abolished. It secured the modern borders of the Republic of Turkey. Though we have to note, this came at an incredibly high human cost, including a massive traumatic mandatory population exchange that permanently displaced millions of Greeks and Turks. But legally speaking, Sevres was dead. The map was healed. But the minds of the people who nearly lost their very existence, they were permanently altered. Experts identify a lasting, deep-seated national mindset that was born directly from the terror of 1920. Enter the Sevres syndrome. This is the ghost of that unratified treaty, and it's been haunting the region's geopolitics for a century. It's basically defined as a persistent belief that Western and external powers are constantly conspiring to weaken, partition, and ultimately destroy the Turkish state. It's a geopolitical defense mechanism. And honestly, when your nation was literally carved up on a porcelain table by foreign diplomats just a few generations ago, that paranoia isn't entirely irrational. It is learned behavior. This syndrome explains so much about the modern Middle East. It reveals exactly why the nation remains so fiercely protective of its unity and highly suspicious of foreign interventions. The fear that the execution order of Sevres could one day be reactivated is burned into their political DNA. It fuels anti-imperialism, it drives deep-seated suspicion toward Western allies, including the United States today. It frames how the state views internal and external issues, from sensitivities over Kurdish separatism to interpretations of history, viewing them all through a lens of existential threat and Western conspiracy. It is literally the invisible architect of Ankara's foreign policy. It leaves us with a pretty profound realization. You can redraw a country's borders with a pen, sure, but it takes far more than ink to erase the historical trauma of almost losing your nation forever. The ghost of Sevres still walks the halls of power today. It's a constant reminder of a time when the world tried to erase an entire civilization, only to birth a modern nation forged in the absolute fires of survival. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning the map.